As the title says, I will carry out a contextual analysis of the concepts of digital skills, digital culture. This course was presented yesterday and today is based on democracy and respect for human rights. Simona talked a lot about this, and that's why when we talk about digital education, we are not truly talking about skills or competencies. We want to go beyond. When we talk about digital skills, we're talking about digital culture of a democratic nature. So practices and knowledge to live in the current society, and not as much to adapt to this complex, flexible worlds we live in, but based on what we've been seeing these days, this is to try and transform it and drive it from democracy and basic rights. We would like to remind you that there's translation from Catalan to Spanish if someone needs it. We have Catalan, Spanish, and English in all combinations. So from this focus, overcoming digital competencies and understanding digital education as a culture issue, and from this we have performed a critical analysis of the reference frameworks that basically frame educational policies here in Catalonia, in our region. I'm talking about the draft of curriculum decree that is still to be approved, and the documents that establish the digital competencies at a European level, the teaching digital competencies framework, and the digital plan for Catalonia. We have been analyzing different documents, and we have put together 7 recommendations we believe are necessary to overcome this conception of digital education and move more towards a digital culture and democratic digitalization in the educational field. So I will summarize this analysis and the recommendations this has generated. So firstly, we have detected that generally speaking, when we talk about digital literacy, we talk about a framework focused on citizens through the acquisition of basic competences and an economic market that is focused on competitiveness at a European level. So the goals for European citizens stem from these 2 frameworks. And the first recommendation, therefore, we consider to be obvious, and it's adding an additional framework focused on democratic digitalization. That's what we're pursuing throughout the course, placing digital rights as the acquisition of digital literacy, and establishes democracy as foundations and horizon for the digital education. Secondly, these documents analyzed takes into account all parties involved in digital education. We talk about students, teachers, centers, educational administrations, and even when we talk about cybersecurity, there are evil agents or agents of this type. But in very few instances, technological companies are considered, or non-technological companies and organized civil society as agents that also have their own personal agendas and intervene directly or indirectly in digital education. So in reference frameworks, the interests of some stakeholders, such as the UNESCO, OECD, or the World Bank, are reflected by action. They are always quoted as authorities in the preambles. However, other interests, such as those of big techs, do not appear in these documents, so are never become problems. And there's other interests, such as the organized civil society's interests and groups such as digital rights groups, are not or do not appear in these documents, neither through action or omission. So what we see is that without taking into account the stakeholders of the digital society in a more comprehensive way, taking into account their dimensions and scales and also their interests, any educational proposal is subject to the dynamics of power. Joan Subirats yesterday was talking about the political load. I would add the business load of technologies. Gersaura also showed us a visual constellation of all the different stakeholders of philanthrocapitalism who are focused in digital education. So the second recommendation will be to critically consider all the different stakeholders involved in society and digital education to guarantee digital sovereignty, but also educational sovereignty. What does this mean? Well, among other things, we need to place special focus in doing education at the margin or aside from the big technological companies and doing specific training with students and teachers to critically get to know all the different stakeholders in the digital society. Along the same lines, the absent element in this digital literacy documents that we have analyzed is the public administration. We talk about digital literacy of teachers and students, of citizens, and even the educational centers. Educational centers also need to be have competent digital competences, but we don't consider the public administration as a body that needs to be digital literate. So the administration should not be left to the side of these requirements. So the third recommendation is about considering the public administration as an individual that is guarantor of digital competencies or literacy. So those that are considered to be related to public administration, we would see the proactive promotion of democratic digitalization and digital rights, which is what we're talking about these days, starting by the deployment of digital infrastructures that are auditable and also in agreement with public money, public code principles, guaranteeing that the technologies that are funded by public administration are open source solutions. We have seen the whys and for whom of digital education. Let's go now to the what's. And when we talk about the digital world, what we have been able to analyze out of all these documents is that there's three concepts stemming from all this related to what we consider as digital. There's, in the first place, a functional and instrumental focus that understands that the digital world is a multifunctional tool. So the digital education that is embedded in this concept is basically training people in the use of these tools, and this is the concept that has been delivered the most, or the one that we know best, and can also be seen and perceived in trainings in schools. There's a second focus, which is a notational instrumental focus that understands the digital world as a code, as a language that is also linked to computational thinking, and therefore the education that is embedded in that would be to make people literate in computational language. This has been introduced gradually, not from the very beginning. It's more like an innovation that is gradually being introduced. And finally, there would be a cultural focus that understands that the digital world is a social and cultural element that is complex. And in education, this would entail two things. On the one hand, the acquisition of substantial knowledge on concepts and stakeholders and specific facts of the digital society. And on the other hand, to acquire critical thinking strategies and creative thinking strategies regarding different realities of the society, such as management of information, datafication, artificial intelligence, or open knowledge. So the fourth recommendation is based on a comprehensive concept of the digital world and digital literacy that encompasses these three concepts, and we should be aware of them. So tools, code, and society. And none of the concepts should be left aside. Taking into account that in recent years there's been a clear preponderance or priority of the first technological and instrumental focus, understanding the digital world only as a tool, what we need to do now is to place special focus on the other two pillars. So work in computational literacy and substantial knowledge of society and digital culture. Along these lines, in order to avoid oversimplifying things, understanding the digital world as just a tool, we should avoid conceiving competencies as operational abilities or skills that learn or teach how to do procedures. Understanding this operationally and abandoning substantive knowledge is a problem for many reasons. I will just mention two. Firstly, because it separates knowledge from culture and society, and also because sometimes, well, we say that information is power, and we must understand that substantial knowledge is the foundation of education, of a solid and robust and democratic education, and its absence generates an empty and formless learning. So the fifth recommendation would be based on a comprehensive understanding of competences that not only includes procedures and attitudes, but includes explicitly substantial first-order concepts regarding society and digital culture. We must ensure
hem mirat de posar en acció en aquest curs que el currículum
the curriculum should include additional contents that are now not included. Jason Kelly yesterday, for instance, talked about including artificial intelligence in the curriculum. We would add the history of ITC and geography of ITC, social ecosystems such as social media, on a positive note, not just from the fear and problems they can generate. Only the management and surveillance market, technologic stakeholders and economic stakeholders of digital society, and obviously the knowledge of digital rights.
Si deixem els continguts de banda I passem a les màquines I als programes.
Let's move on to machines and programs now, and what we find in the documents is that digital infrastructures are not considered to be central focuses of educational centers. They do not appear as a properly framed topic within reference frameworks, but we've seen it these days. Digital structures in schools entail very critical data of all the community. This didn't used to happen because we were physically in schools and there was no digitalization in the cloud. So in the current moment of digital society, there's differences regarding other periods, and there's the informational market and new types of powers. Machines and programs are nowadays one of the turnkeys of this digital society we're talking about. So the sixth recommendation will be about recommending digital infrastructure of educational centers as axis of politics and educational strategies. On the one hand, the public administration needs to become responsible for the provision of these infrastructures and guaranteeing digital sovereignty and also educational sovereignty apart from the corporate interests of companies. I will finish now. Regarding many aspects, the different analyzed situations do show we are moving towards democratic education. We're doing lots of things, and we can see that the different documents show this. But regarding open culture, what we've detected is a clear drawback in favor of the lobbies of the copywriting industry and in favor of the recognition of external authorships external to the educational community. So the seventh and last recommendation would be therefore to go for open and democratic knowledge aside from these business interests that are based on intellectual property, the rights of authors and private products, and that the public administration should become involved and promote education and open culture as it used to and as appeared in many reference frameworks. The oldest one what we've detected is that as we move forward, we continue seeing references regarding copyright, but open knowledge and open resources are gradually disappearing. So as a conclusion, I would only like to say that this fragmented and selective vision is a strategy of some interest groups to cancel the structural comprehension of the dynamics that take place in digital society. So we need to put together this fragmented view, doing systemic and comprehensive analysis that allow us to have global comprehension and consistency, democratic and educational consistency in all the different fields. What we frequently find when we go to schools is that we see that when they do a digital education, for instance, we see situations where there's courses on cybersecurity, and even law enforcement officers come, and this is considered to be digital education. But then on the other hand, we have the big techs presented as providers of the big platforms, so there is lack of consistency within this digital education landscape. So we consider that we must have this global view, this comprehensive view, and this is what we have tried to apply in this analysis of the reference frameworks and what we believe can take us to have this paradigm of competencies to understand and have a true democratic digital education. This is where I stop. Thank you very much.
Només afegir una cosa.
I would just like to add one thing. On the basis of the work done by Cecilia, maybe she can read the reference frameworks with which the curriculum of teachers is created. So maybe you can read it to us. We have created a document, she has created a document, which will be the document or the outcome of this Congress, a document that we will draft with the different presenters who have come along and also with your comments, and this will be the political document that we will present in order to move towards a digital framework and program that can be more democratic. So this is work in progress documents that we start now with Cecilia's work, and we will open it up for your comments later on. So the frameworks are 12. Very quickly, I'll give you the titles and headlines first. They're from most recent to oldest. DISCOM 2.2, which is the most recent document of digital literacy at a European level, the draft of the decree of the mandate of basic education, draft of the new curriculum in the Catalan territory, then internal training of centers that is done within the framework of digital strategy of centers within educational centers in Catalonia, the reference framework of digital literacy for teachers that was published in January 2022 by the Ministry of Education, then the documents regarding the digital center strategy published by the Education Department, the organic law, the latest legislation in Spain, the proposal of new content for ACTIC, which is an update to the contents of the year 2020, the Digital Education Plan for Catalonia 2020-2023, which was published by the Department of Education in September 2020, the Framework of Digital Competencies for Citizens, which is DIGCOM 2.1, which is the previous European framework regarding digital competencies, the contents of ACTIC competencies in the previous version of 2016, the promotion to DIGCOM.org, which would be the version of digital competencies, but in the version of educational organizations, which is of 2015. There's no more recent document regarding organizations. And finally, the LEC, which is the Catalonian educational law of the year 2009, which is still in force. Okay, so great work, Cecilia. Let's continue.